And yet, it's so obvious that when you move into a new culture, you have some decisions to make. On the basis of that, the new culture, some of it's right, some of it has to be rejected, some of it can be embraced because it's indifferent, perhaps, or some of it needs to be repurposed. And so I began to realize in my own denomination, for example, that I had a number of people who all believed in the Westminster standards and we had the same doctrinal foundation, yet the way we were doing ministry was not only very, very different, but we were hostile to each other about it. And Rick's book helped me understand that, because I realized that most of us do not do theological reflection on our culture. You have to take your doctrinal foundations, what you believe, and then use it as you think very carefully about your culture, to know how to relate to it. Most of us tend to just pick up programs, ministry programs that we read in books, and we just say, oh, that'll work, or we think, without much reflection, we jump from our doctrinal foundation to programs, because we pick up, if pastors pick up all these books saying, here's how to do small groups, here's how to do worship, we tend to make our decisions viscerally, sort of like, my temperament likes that, or maybe I used to live in Alabama, now I live in New England, and all I know is in Alabama, that's how I did it, so I just start doing it here without any thinking about the difference of culture. I realized that was the missing piece. It was theological reflection on culture that needs to happen. I mean, I'm not leaving my doctrinal foundations. I'm using the doctrinal foundations as a way to do the theological reflection, but that instead of just jumping up to programs, I need to do deeper reflection. And it also helped me understand that the reason why in my denomination we have such different views is because people actually have come up with pretty different theological visions, and they've come to different conclusions about the culture. And not only culture, because Rick points out, it's also, the culture is the present, the past is your tradition. We also have different views of what part of tradition fits today and what does not. So it just opened my mind to it, but of course Rick was writing a theology book, not a practical ministry book, so I felt over the years I wanted to apply it. So the Center Church comes from many, many years of thinking out the implications of the insight I got when I read Rick's book in early 90s, right? 92 or something like that.
Yeah, I forgot to set the ground rules for this panel.
Rules?
Yeah, some rules. Not universal rules, David, but I was taught that the best moderators are the ones that just kind of get out of the way. They don't impose their position during any particular panel. But
you're not going to do that.
I won't make any comments there. But Rick and David, please feel free, and Tim, just to interact with one another if you want to follow up, if you want clarification, and so on. Rick, would you like to possibly
I think
respond?
Tim's point, it's often hard to explain why Christians who agree on so much seem to disagree so often. And it's not uncommon, it's not unusual to our age. There are peculiar ways, I think, that we become partisans often of ourselves. There's this grand rivalry, used to be anyway, between Boston and New York. We all participate in these rivalries, and we carry it over. So there is something unique to our age. But of course, as a colleague of mine says, every letter in the New Testament is written to a church in conflict. Conflict among us is not unusual. And so thinking outside the box of our differences strikes me as pretty important to ask why it is that we seem to agree on so much and disagree so much as well. The mythologies, the stories that we purchase inevitably from our times influence those partisan loyalties. And getting at those myths is only shattered by understanding the biblical mythology, the story, this grand epic. And so the point often is how much richer, thicker, more interesting is the biblical story than our stories, and ways in which it comes into conflict. We're always much better, though, I think, in seeing somebody else's mythologies than we are seeing our own mythologies.